The fresh spring breeze swept through the small town of Bloomfield, carrying the scent of wildflowers that painted the surrounding fields in vibrant colors. The church tower's clock chimed the hour, a familiar sound that marked the rhythm of daily life for the townsfolk. Bloomfield was a place where life moved at a steady, unhurried pace, but on that Sunday morning, something different seemed to hang in the air. Lydia Bennet walked along the gravel path leading to the church, her light shoes kicking up tiny clouds of dust. With a notebook in hand, she mentally reviewed the key points of her lesson for Sunday school. Teaching was her passion, and the town's children filled her heart with joy, even when challenges arose. She glanced up at the church's white facade and noticed a small group of people gathered near the entrance. "He's arrived, hasn't he?" came the excited voice of Claire, her colleague and friend. Lydia turned to the older woman, who held a bouquet of wildflowers. "Yes, the new pastor. He seems younger than we expected," Claire went on, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Lydia offered a polite smile but remained reserved. She wasn't one to be swept up in collective excitement, preferring to observe before forming an opinion. As she entered the sanctuary, she felt the welcoming warmth of the space, bathed in sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. At the pulpit stood Ethan Miller, the new pastor. His presence was both calm and commanding, a contrast that immediately drew attention. He adjusted the microphone with composure and looked out at the congregation with eyes that seemed to hold untold stories. "It's an honor to be here with you on this new journey," he began, his voice steady and filled with emotion. "My prayer is that we can grow together in the faith and love that God teaches us." Lydia noticed something distinct in his tone, as if each word had been carefully chosen with a purpose that extended beyond the moment. She couldn't help but wonder what had brought him to Bloomfield. After the service, as the townsfolk gathered to greet Ethan, Lydia kept her distance. However, when their eyes met briefly, there was a silent exchange, a mutual curiosity that made them quickly look away. That afternoon, Bloomfield seemed to hum with new energy, as if the pastor's arrival had brought springtime not only to the fields but also to the hearts of those who lived there. Yet Lydia couldn't have foreseen just how much this new season would change her own story. Roots and new beginnings. The Sunday afternoon carried with it the tranquil essence of spring in Bloomfield. Lydia sat on her porch, the gentle breeze swaying the linen curtains. She flipped through one of the textbooks she used to prepare her lessons, but her mind kept wandering back to that morning's service. The new pastor. Ethan Miller. Something about him had piqued her curiosity, though she couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. It wasn't just the way he spoke but the way he seemed to study people, as if trying to understand them before they even spoke a word. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was settling into his new pastoral home, unpacking the few belongings he had brought with him. Amid the boxes and stacks of books, he came across a photograph of his late wife. His fingers lingered on the frame, the pain still present but cloaked in the acceptance he had painstakingly built through prayer and perseverance. "Bloomfield is a fresh start," he murmured to himself, the words more a prayer than a statement. As the week went on, Lydia and Ethan's paths began to cross. Their first meeting happened when Lydia brought some of her students to the church. Ethan was setting up the space for a youth event and was the one to open the door when she arrived. "Miss Bennet, isn't it?" he asked, holding the door open for her. "Please, just Lydia." She smiled, the formality eased by his friendly tone. "Well, Lydia, I'm glad you're here. The kids are going to love the event. We need more moments like this to bring the community together," Ethan said with a lightness that surprised her. During the preparations, the two found themselves talking more than they had expected. Lydia was struck by Ethan's sensitivity in interacting with the children and his thoughtful approach to addressing the community's needs. Ethan, in turn, admired Lydia's passion for teaching, the way she instilled confidence in the kids, and how her gentle voice carried an undercurrent of strength and resolve. Yet there was an unspoken distance between them, as if each was holding back a part of themselves they weren't ready to share. Lydia, especially, felt torn. A shadow from her past, a relationship that had ended in pain and disillusionment, still weighed on her. Trusting again seemed an insurmountable challenge. That night, Lydia prayed before going to bed, asking God for wisdom to navigate the confusing emotions beginning to stir in her heart. Across town, Ethan was doing the same, leaning over his open Bible, his fingers tracing the words of Psalm 23 as he sought comfort and guidance. Spring marched on, and with it, invisible seeds began to take root in the hearts of Lydia and Ethan. Roots that were growing deeper, even if neither of them realized it yet. An unexpected invitation. On Thursday morning, Lydia was in her classroom, organizing art supplies for a project the children would be working on. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the room, but her focus was on a pedagogical article she had read the night before. It was her way of managing life, dedicating herself to her work and the well-being of her students. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she looked up, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway, holding an envelope. He smiled, a quiet, thoughtful smile that seemed to carry stories untold. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, glancing at the children, who were now curiously watching him. "Not at all," Lydia replied, standing and walking toward him. "Something important?" Ethan handed her the envelope. "We're organizing a community program at the church for the kids, games, music, Bible stories. I thought it could be a great opportunity for your students. And, well, I was hoping you might help lead a few of the activities." Lydia opened the envelope and read the invitation. It was simple but well thought out. There was something about the proposal that felt more significant than just a community event. Ethan was trying to build something, and Lydia could sense the care in every detail. "It's a wonderful idea," she said, looking at him with approval. "I'm sure the children will love it. And, of course, I'd be happy to help." Ethan's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Lydia. Your experience with the kids will make all the difference." Over the following days, the two began working together to plan the event. Between brainstorming games and organizing activities, they discovered unexpected commonalities. Lydia noticed that Ethan had a natural ability to connect with people, inspiring trust without being overbearing. Ethan, in turn, admired Lydia's meticulous approach, always prioritizing the children's needs. During one of their planning meetings, as they arranged supplies in the church hall, Ethan paused and looked at Lydia with genuine curiosity. "Did you always want to be a teacher?" he asked, his voice warm and thoughtful. Lydia hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, for as long as I can remember. Teaching has always brought me joy, but it's also given me purpose, especially during the harder times." Ethan noticed the shadow that crossed her face but didn't press her further. Instead, he nodded. "I understand. I think we all have something that keeps us going, even through the storms." Lydia caught the introspective tone in his voice and felt the urge to ask more but decided to hold the question for another time. The community event was a resounding success. The children laughed, ran, and learned, while the parents praised the organization. During one of Ethan's Bible story sessions, Lydia watched him closely. He spoke with a simple yet contagious enthusiasm that captivated the children. As she observed, she felt a spark of something she couldn't quite name. Later, as they cleaned up together, Ethan turned to her and said, "I think this was a great start." Lydia smiled. Yes, a promising start. The look they shared that evening seemed to hold a quiet promise of something more. But, like all things that bloom in spring, it would take time to grow. Shadows of the past. The community event had ended days ago, yet its memories lingered in Lydia's mind, the laughter of the children, the teamwork with Ethan, and, most of all, the sense that something within her was slowly changing. Still, as she walked along the path to the school that morning, she felt the weight of an old burden she had never fully managed to let go of. Lydia had learned to hide the scars of her past, but now, in the face of what seemed like a new chapter in her life, those memories began to resurface, like winter flowers blooming out of season, unexpected and persistent. Meanwhile, Ethan was in his office at the church, reviewing notes for Sunday's sermon. He opened his Bible and paused at Psalm 147 verse 3, "He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds." The words felt like they were speaking directly to him. He thought of the woman who had once been his whole world. The pain of losing her was still fresh, but it was now accompanied by a new feeling, hope. A hope he wasn't sure he had the right to feel, but that had been quietly growing since he met Lydia. That afternoon, while helping organize a classroom for an art activity, Ethan noticed Lydia seemed more serious than usual. He couldn't help but ask, "Is everything okay, Lydia?" She hesitated, holding a small vase she had been placing on the table. "Yes. I was just thinking about how some memories catch up to us, no matter how much we try to leave them behind." Ethan didn't respond immediately, but his silence felt as comforting as any words could have been. "I went through a relationship that left me deeply hurt," Lydia admitted at last, as though the weight of the words needed to be released. "It was years ago, but I still carry the fear of trusting again." Ethan nodded slowly, like someone who understood that pain all too well. "I understand more than you might think," he said softly. "I lost my wife in an accident 3 years ago. At the time, I thought I'd never feel anything beyond pain again." Lydia's eyes widened with surprise and empathy. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He smiled, though it was tinged with melancholy. "Thank you. God has been my strength. And I believe, somehow, there's a purpose to all of it." That brief conversation brought them closer in a new way. For the first time, Lydia saw Ethan's scars and recognized something of her own in them. For the first time, Ethan felt he could share a piece of himself without fear of judgment. That night, as they both reflected on their conversation, they realized they were on an unfamiliar path, but one that God seemed to be guiding. They both knew they would have to face their shadows if they wanted to move forward. And so, like the first light of dawn after a long night, something new began to emerge on the horizon of their lives. The strength of community. The Bloomfield Church was bustling with activity that week. With spring in full bloom, the townsfolk were preparing for the traditional Harvest Festival, a celebration of gratitude and community unity. Lydia had committed to helping with the planning, which meant spending more time alongside Ethan. Though she felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation, his presence was beginning to feel strangely and comfortingly familiar. That morning, Ethan gathered a small group of volunteers in the church hall. Lydia was among them, standing next to Claire and a few other residents. Ethan distributed tasks with his signature calm but assured demeanor. "Lydia," he said, handing her a list. "You and I can handle the decorations. I hear you have an eye for organizing events." "Oh, and who told you that?" Lydia replied, a hesitant smile playing on her lips. "Claire," he said with a laugh. She also mentioned that you're a bit particular, so I'll be sure to follow your lead. The group chuckled, and Lydia blushed slightly but nodded in agreement. The following days were filled with activity. Lydia and Ethan spent hours together decorating the hall and arranging tables, carefully choosing flowers and colors that reflected the joy of the season. Small moments of lightheartedness and playful banter began to emerge between them, like when Ethan accidentally knocked over a bucket of flowers and Lydia couldn't suppress her laughter. "I'm guessing this wasn't part of your decoration plan," he joked, crouching down to pick up the scattered blooms, his smile sheepish. "Let's call it artistic flair," Lydia replied, handing him a fresh bouquet. As they worked, the community noticed the connection growing between them. Whispers circulated quietly, speculating that springtime in Bloomfield might be bringing more than just flowers. On the night of the festival, the hall was transformed. Soft string lights hung from the ceiling, twinkling like stars, while flower arrangements filled the air with a delicate fragrance. Children raced around, laughing, as adults shared stories and homemade dishes. Lydia watched it all with a mix of pride and gratitude. When Ethan stepped onto the makeshift stage to thank everyone, his gaze briefly met hers. There was something in that look, something Lydia dared not interpret but that warmed her heart nonetheless. "Today is a day to celebrate God's goodness," Ethan began, his voice resonating through the hall. "Spring reminds us that after the harshest winters, life blooms again. This isn't just true for the earth, it's true for our hearts as well." The words struck a chord deep within Lydia, as if they were meant specifically for her. After the speech, as they tidied up the final details of the event, Ethan approached her. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Lydia said, adjusting a floral arrangement. "Actually, I should be thanking you," Ethan replied. "You brought beauty and order to all of this, and maybe to a few parts of my life that were a bit messy, too." Lydia's heart skipped a beat. Before she could respond, a child ran up and tugged Ethan away to join a game. She smiled, staying behind to reflect on his words. That night, as the community celebrated together, both Lydia and Ethan came to realize something important: the love born from the strength of a united community has deep roots, roots strong enough to sustain even the most broken hearts. Doubts and decisions. The days following the Harvest Festival brought a new dynamic between Lydia and Ethan. Though the bond between them was undeniable, both felt the weight of unspoken doubts. It was as if spring, with all its promises of renewal, also demanded they confront their uncertainties. Lydia found herself spending more time in prayer than usual. At night, sitting by her open window and gazing at the starry sky, she wrestled with whether she should allow her heart to open again. She thought of Ethan, the way he always seemed willing to listen, to shoulder the burdens of others, and the quiet light in his eyes when he spoke of his faith. Yet a persistent fear reminded her of the heartbreak she had endured in the past. "Lord," she prayed one evening, "if this is your will, give me courage. Show me the way. I don't want to make another mistake." Meanwhile, Ethan faced his own inner struggles. He walked through Bloomfield's quiet streets after a long church meeting, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, trying to sort through his thoughts. Since the festival, his feelings for Lydia had grown in ways he hadn't expected. There was something about her, her gentle strength, her devotion to the children, her quiet joy, that made him believe God might be guiding his life in a new direction. But guilt held him back, the memory of his late wife casting a shadow over his hope. Could he truly honor her memory while opening his heart again? He prayed for clarity, bringing his fears and questions to God. That weekend, a misunderstanding tested the fragile connection they had built. During a church planning meeting for another event, Lydia noticed Ethan in a seemingly intense conversation with Claire. From where she stood, she couldn't hear their words, but Ethan's worried expression and Claire's serious demeanor made her fear the worst. Later, while tidying up her classroom, Claire appeared in the doorway. "You seem distracted, Lydia. Is everything all right?" Lydia hesitated but decided to be honest. "I saw you and Pastor Ethan talking earlier. You both seemed tense." Claire frowned briefly before letting out a soft laugh. "Oh, Lydia. It wasn't anything serious. He was just concerned about some financial matters with the church." "But why do you ask?" The blush that crept up Lydia's face gave her away. Claire, ever perceptive, immediately caught on. "Ah, I see. You're wondering if he feels the same, aren't you?" "Claire." Lydia protested, but her friend only smiled knowingly. The following Sunday, Lydia and Ethan finally had a chance to speak alone. After the service, she was packing up materials from Sunday school when Ethan walked into the room. "Lydia, can we talk?" His voice was hesitant but resolute. She nodded, crossing her arms to steady her nerves. "I've been reflecting a lot on us," he began, his words carefully chosen. "I feel like God is doing something new in my life, but I don't want to rush anything. I know we both carry baggage, and I respect the time you need. I just wanted you to know that I'm willing to wait if that's what God has planned for us." Lydia felt a lump rise in her throat. There was something so genuine in his words that it began to dissolve her lingering doubts. "Ethan," she replied, her voice trembling, "I'm also trying to understand what God has in store for us. I just need time to trust again." Ethan nodded, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. "I get it. And I'll be here." As they parted that afternoon, something had shifted. There were still doubts, but there was also a new understanding, a quiet agreement to move slowly, guided by faith. Light in the darkness. Spring in Bloomfield had brought sunny days and gentle breezes, but that afternoon an unexpected storm engulfed the town. Dense clouds rolled in, heralding a torrential downpour as residents hurried to find shelter. Lydia was still at the school, finishing up the day's activities, when the first rumble of thunder echoed. The children had already gone home, leaving the building quiet except for the sound of rain pounding against the windows. As she locked up the classroom, she heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. "Lydia?" Ethan's voice rang out, steady but tinged with concern. He appeared in the doorway, soaked from head to toe, holding a broken umbrella in one hand. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" she asked, startled. "I was on my way home when the storm got worse. I thought you might still be here and could use some help getting back." Lydia smiled, but before she could respond, the lights flickered and then went out completely. The school was plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning. "Looks like we'll be here for a while," Ethan said, trying to lighten the mood. Lydia let out a nervous laugh, and they decided to take shelter in the teacher's lounge, where they found candles and matches. As the flickering flames cast gentle shadows on the walls, they sat side by side on old chairs, listening to the relentless rain and distant thunder. The comfortable silence soon gave way to a deeper conversation. Perhaps it was the storm outside or the unexpected closeness, but both felt it was the right time to share what they had been holding back. "Lydia," Ethan began, his gaze fixed on the candle's flame, "when I came to Bloomfield, I thought I was just running from painful memories. I believed it would be easier to serve here without facing what I'd lost. But God has been teaching me that there's no escaping pain, only finding purpose in it." Lydia listened intently, his honesty striking a chord deep within her. When I was younger, she said quietly, I fell in love with someone who made promises they couldn't keep. It left me deeply hurt, and for a long time, I felt unworthy of real love. I thought my faith alone would fill that void. But, she hesitated, summoning courage. Since you arrived, I've started to wonder if God has other plans. Ethan turned to her, his eyes reflecting the warm light of the candle. Lydia, whatever lies ahead, I want to face it with patience and faith. God hasn't called us to be perfect, only to trust Him with each step. The rain began to ease, its roar softening to a gentle murmur. Something about the storm seemed to have cleansed the air, both around them and within their hearts. When the power finally returned and the rain subsided, Ethan insisted on walking Lydia home. The path was dotted with puddles that mirrored the clearing sky. When they reached her door, he paused. Lydia, he said, his voice steady yet tender, I know the road ahead might be long, but I'm willing to walk it with you, one step at a time. She looked at him, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Ethan, I believe God brought us together for a reason. And I'm ready to find out what that is. In that moment, under the golden glow of an emerging moon, an unspoken promise passed between them, a quiet vow of trust and hope. The spring of new beginnings. The days following the storm brought a clarity Lydia and Ethan had never experienced before. Spring felt more vibrant than ever, the fields surrounding Bloomfield were awash with flowers, and the air carried a freshness that mirrored the transformations in their hearts. On Saturday morning, the church was bustling with activity. Ethan had invited the community for a special gathering, a moment of reflection and gratitude. Lydia arrived early, as usual, to help arrange the pews and prepare the table for the community coffee. This time, however, her thoughts lingered on Ethan and the conversation they had shared during the storm. As she adjusted the chairs, she heard his voice calling her name. Turning around, she saw him carrying a small wooden box. Good morning, Lydia, he greeted her warmly. Good morning, Ethan. Is everything ready for today? Almost, he replied, setting the box down on a table. But I wanted to show you something first. Intrigued, Lydia stepped closer as he opened the box and removed an old book. The worn cover revealed its frequent use. It's my wife's journal, Ethan explained, his tone steady but tender. After she passed, I spent a lot of time reading through her writings. This book brought me comfort when nothing else seemed to make sense. Lydia lightly touched the journal's cover, respecting the profound meaning it held. She wrote about her faith, about the love she had for me, and her trust in God even in the hardest times. Reading it taught me that, even when the pain feels unbearable, God offers us new beginnings. Ethan closed the journal and looked at Lydia. I've realized that I need to let it go, not to forget her, but as a step toward embracing what God is doing in my life now. And I believe that includes you. Lydia felt her eyes well up with tears, but she held his gaze. Ethan, I feel God is working in us too, but I need you to know. I'm still learning to trust again. I don't want to take a step until I'm truly ready. Ethan nodded, his expression full of understanding. Then we'll walk at the pace God sets for us. I'm not in a hurry. I'm just grateful to be on this journey with you. The community gathering was a resounding success, filled with music, prayers, and testimonies that uplifted everyone. As Ethan spoke about renewal and hope, his eyes met Lydia's several times. His words, steeped in faith and humility, felt like a private conversation between the two of them, even amidst the crowd. That afternoon, as the townsfolk headed home, Lydia and Ethan stayed behind to tidy up the church. Working side by side, the silence between them was comforting, as if words were unnecessary. When they finished, Ethan walked Lydia to her gate, as had become their routine. Before parting, he looked at her and said, "Lydia, every new beginning takes courage, but I'm learning that we don't have to face it alone. Thank you for letting me be by your side." She smiled, feeling the warmth of his words spread through her heart. "Ethan, I think God knew I needed someone like you to remind me of that." As he walked away, the sun began to set, painting the sky in golden and rosy hues. Lydia stayed by the gate, watching until he disappeared from view, filled with the certainty that just as spring promised renewed life, God was bringing something new and beautiful into their lives. The day of the choice. The sky over Bloomfield was crystal clear on that Sunday morning, as if nature had decided to mirror the peace gradually settling in the hearts of Lydia and Ethan. The church was packed, pews filled with families who had known one another for generations. There was an air of quiet anticipation, though no one could quite explain why. Lydia arrived early, as usual, to prepare the Sunday school materials. Her light blue dress seemed to reflect the day's calm, but inside, she felt a whirlwind of emotions. Her conversation with Ethan still echoed in her mind. He was willing to walk beside her, but she knew that eventually, she would need to make a decision. Ethan, meanwhile, was in the pastor's office, praying before the service. He felt the weight of something he knew he needed to say but hesitated, unsure if the timing was right. He opened his Bible to Isaiah 43 verse 19, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it?" The verse strengthened him, yet also challenged him. During the service, Ethan preached with a passion that captured everyone's attention. He spoke about the importance of trusting God's plans, even when the path ahead seemed unclear. Sometimes, God calls us to take a step of faith. He challenges us to leave behind the safety of our fears and embrace what He has for us, even if the way forward is unknown. What He offers is always greater than what we fear to lose. His words struck a chord deep within Lydia. As he spoke, their eyes met more than once, and it felt as though each sentence was meant for her. After the service, Ethan extended an invitation to the congregation, a community picnic to celebrate spring at the town park. Lydia knew it would be an opportunity to spend time near him, but she also felt anxious about what the day might hold. The park was alive with activity. Children ran among the blooming trees, and families spread picnic blankets across the grass. Ethan stood with a group of young people, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd for Lydia. When he finally spotted her, walking with a basket in her hands, his heart quickened. "Lydia," he called out, walking toward her. "I'm glad you came." She smiled, trying to mask her nerves. "I wouldn't miss this. The kids at school would never let me hear the end of it if I did." They laughed, but their conversation soon turned more serious as they drifted away from the group. Beneath the shade of a blooming cherry tree, Ethan found his courage. "Lydia," he began, holding a small branch of blossoms that had fallen from the tree, "we agreed to take things slow, and I'm committed to that. But I also want to be honest about how I feel. Since I arrived in Bloomfield, you've been a source of strength and inspiration for me. I believe God is guiding us towards something special, and I wanted to know how you feel about that." Lydia took a deep breath. Her heart raced, but a quiet peace assured her that she was exactly where she was meant to be. "Ethan," she replied softly, "I believe God is leading us too. I won't lie, I'm still afraid. But I also feel that you are an answer to my prayers. I want to trust what God is doing in our lives." Ethan's smile was radiant, as if all his uncertainties had been lifted in that moment. "Then let's walk this path together," he said. Beneath the cherry tree, surrounded by the community they both cherished, the two reached an understanding. It was only the beginning of something new, but they knew they were on the right path, guided by faith and the promise that God was in control. The blossoming of love. The days following the community picnic were filled with moments that seemed to herald the blossoming of something extraordinary. Lydia and Ethan continued to cross paths at community events, church meetings, and occasional walks through the fields surrounding Bloomfield. Each conversation deepened their connection, and while both remained cautious, a quiet certainty was growing in their hearts. One sunny afternoon, Ethan invited Lydia for a walk to an old barn the community used for emergency supplies. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice carrying a quiet excitement. When they arrived, Lydia was delighted to see the barn had been partially transformed. There were neatly arranged shelves of donations, stocked supplies, and a bulletin board displaying photos from past church events. "I'm planning to turn this into a community center," Ethan explained. "A place where people can not only come for help but also find support, share stories, and feel part of something greater." Lydia looked at him, impressed. "This is incredible, Ethan. You truly believe in the power of community, don't you?" "I do," he replied with a smile. "And I believe God calls us to be instruments of change, even in the simplest ways. But this place, it's not just about others. It's also a symbol of what I want to build with you, Lydia." His words took her by surprise, but instead of hesitating, Lydia felt a peace urging her forward. "Ethan," she said, her eyes glistening with tears, "I believe God brought us together for a reason. I'm ready to walk beside you, wherever He leads us." Months later, the community center opened with a grand celebration. The barn, now transformed, was a place of joy and refuge. During the event, Ethan stepped onto the makeshift stage and addressed the crowd. "Today is a day of celebration, not just for what we've built here but for what God has been doing in our lives," he began. His eyes found Lydia's in the crowd. "And there's something I'd like to share with you all." Ethan stepped down from the stage and walked toward Lydia. Taking her hands in his, he knelt before her, eliciting gasps and murmurs from the gathering. "Lydia Bennett, from the moment I met you, I knew you were someone special. God has used you to heal parts of my heart I thought would never be restored. You've brought light into my life. Today, before our community and in God's presence, I want to ask, will you be my wife?" Tears streamed down Lydia's face as she looked at Ethan. The crowd was silent, waiting for her reply. With a radiant smile, she answered, "Yes, Ethan. Yes, I will." Joy erupted among the crowd. The church and community celebrated not just their engagement but the testament of a love that had flourished through faith and courage. A few months later, spring returned to Bloomfield, bringing the promise of new beginnings. In the church's small garden, Lydia and Ethan exchanged vows before God and the community that had supported them. The ceremony was simple but brimming with emotion. Lydia looked into Ethan's eyes, her own shining with joy. "With you, Ethan, I've discovered that true love is the kind that draws us closer to God." Ethan held her hands firmly. "And with you, Lydia, I've learned that God always has a purpose, even in our hardest moments." As the flowers around them swayed in the breeze and the sound of applause filled the air, they knew their journey was only beginning. It was a love that had arrived with the spring but would blossom through every season of their lives. What did you think of this story? Have you experienced moments when God transformed your pain into new beginnings? Share in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt and inspiring stories. This is the channel, Embracing Narratives. Stay with God, and see you in the next story.